Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, brought to you by the Wealthy Speaker School. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Hey everyone, welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson. We are so fortunate today to have one of the true nice guys on the show with us. Welcome back, Doug Sandler.
Jane, it's so good to be here. You're one of the nice women in the world of speaking, podcasting, et cetera, et cetera. Jane, thank you for letting me be on the show.
Is it mostly male dominated? Because I listen to a lot of women actually in podcasting. Tell me, you've been out to a lot of the podcast festivals.
I would say that it probably is more of a male field, only because there's more frustrated broadcasters than us guys that are out there, and the ladies have too. They're comfortable in their skin. Guys, we need to always reach out with our ego, and so broadcasting or podcasting is the way to do it for us. It's probably more men. I don't know the exact statistics. Probably more guys than girls in the field, though. But I'm happy to make that change, though.
Thank you. Let's get it going. Let's get it balanced. That's we're doing the same thing in the speaking industry, and we are just plowing forward fearlessly. So I do have people asking me frequently, how do I get started with my podcast? And you and I have done a couple of shows before, so we're going to have those in the show notes. So I want to get to how do we get started. Let's first start with, why would anybody even want to have their own podcast? Talk about what it's done for you and your business.
Sure. Well, if I start from the end in mind and work my way backwards, podcasting right now is the only tool that we use for marketing our business. We don't use any other. We don't do any Facebook ads. We don't do any email campaigns. I don't even have necessarily a list of any semblance that I put together. And I know that's probably not the best way, but for me, my community has done everything for my getting my business, my podcast production business with Turnkey off of the ground. And so if I work my way backwards, I had a speaking business, and then I had a book, and I started to promote all of that. And I found it was a lot more effective for me to actually make money using the computer than it was to travel across the country and speak this message. And although I know I'm on a speaking show here, and I don't want to deter anybody from building their speaking business, but if you use podcasting as the tool to promote your business, you'll find both being a host of a podcast and being a guest on a podcast is a great way to promote your business. And it's all in the new media space. And if you're not a part of the new media space right now, you're probably missing out on some great marketing opportunity.
You told me a number of how many new podcasts are entering the scene every day. Talk about that.
Sure. So Edison does their research, and they came up with a number around 2,000 new podcasts are starting every day. I mean, every day. And when I see big companies like Spotify getting into the podcasting game, spending $300 million between Gimlet and Anchor, who was a podcast, a launch platform. When I see money like that, Pandora doubling down, Apple completely revamping the face of their page so that podcasting can take a higher level on their page. When I see stuff like that happening, then I know that I'm at the right place at the right time. And when big companies do that, I'm here and I'm happy to be here.
Right. And so let's not let the 2000 deter us, because this is a wave. This is a tsunami, and we're probably still at the beginning of it, don't you think?
Well, when I talk about that quote, what does Abraham Lincoln say? The best time to plant a tree was, or I think it was Abe Lincoln.
It's a Chinese proverb.
Thank you.
Let us give the credit where credit is.
Sorry, and I appreciate that. I think I was mixing up the axe.
Yeah. Go ahead and say it, though, because I want people to know.
The Chinese proverb is, when's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. When's the second best time? It's today.
Today.
Do it now. And it could not be any easier now to get into this space with all of the DIY programs that are out there and the done for you programs that are out there too. It just depends on what you want to do in order to launch your own show.
Right. And so we, even though we're called the Wealthy Speaker Show, we actually look at business models as, let's do what's perfect for you.
Right.
Okay, speaking may be a small amount of your business, and that may drive some other things, or it could be the opposite way. I mean, there's so many different ways for it to go. Talk about how your business has evolved. Are you still doing some speaking?
Well, most of the speaking is done around podcasting now. So I get hired to
Ah,
come in and speak about this new media space of podcasting and promote whatever it is that they are doing with their business. So if you're a professional speaker, a great way to promote your business is to do it through podcasting. And
yep.
so my speaking business has evolved from just customer service, which was the world that I was exclusively in, and 5 or 6 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
to a world now where I'm talking about customer service, but doing it through the eyes of podcasting. So it makes it
Sure.
very effective to do it that way.
Sure. And I really also like the strategy. So you may go through this podcast, kind of look at it for some ideas, but you may come out at the other end and say, I'm only going to do OPPs, other people's podcasts. And that would be fine too. That's a great way to introduce yourself to new audiences, isn't it?
Yeah, you take the idea of just going into it with the idea that you're going to be a guest on podcast. Guesting on podcasting is free. If you have to pay to get on a podcast, I would say that's not a podcast for you. And
Mm,
certainly, you can pay for sponsorship and extra promotion of that particular episode through that host community. But at
sure.
the same time, podcast guesting is free. You need a microphone. You need it. I always boil it down to know your mom, your market, your offer, and your message. And if you
Okay.
know your market, your offer, and your message, then you're really in a good place to promote your business through a single call to action on a podcast.
Love it. Love it. And we get some requests all the time to be on other people's podcasts, OPPs, which is often a great idea. But we also know when to say no because there are groups of people out there who there's nothing to do with speaking. So that's my world. And so
Right.
I'm also very careful not to overextend myself into places that I don't really belong.
Well, and it's pretty simple to find a podcast that would actually be appropriate for your message. And all you need to do really is go to Google or to Apple Podcasts and just type in whatever it is that you do. So let's say that you're in customer service. Type in customer service and then followed by the word podcast. And you're going to find probably 50 to 100 shows that you can pitch and not pitch, like, don't send them your bio and a whole lengthy thing. Just send them a couple of lines. Listen to an episode. See if it's something
Yeah.
that's right for you.
Yeah. Would this idea be of interest? It's two
Right.
lines, and then you can send them more if they're interested. Okay. So um, we kind of have covered some of the reasons that people should consider podcasting. One being that it's you and it's getting your message out there. Do you find sometimes people are all over the place in their messaging on their
Oh
podcast?
yeah, yeah. I love, when I first started working with you, the number one thing that you taught me, or that stayed in my head, was to pick a lane.
Hmm.
The further that you can niche down into what you're actually trying to promote or what you're trying to build, the better you're going to be. I have a podcast. I use it as a passion project. It's called Ford Mustang: The Early Years. I mean, literally, it is from 1964 and a half to 1973. It's all of the first generation Mustang enthusiasts. And you put somebody a guest on my show that is in that space, we're going to get hundreds of listeners. And hundreds of listeners is great when you have a highly niched subject.
Right.
If you're looking for entrepreneurial subjects, you may get thousands of listeners on a show as a
Right.
guest. But if you have a highly niche service that you provide, really, really narrow down, and don't worry about the audience size. Imagine filling a room full of 100 or 200 people every time you go out and speak, and they're interested. They're actively seeking you and your message. It's kind of like on-demand audio, and that's how we do it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, now we've talked about this before, but let's cover it today. Um, Different ways to monetize your podcast. One, we already have speaking at the top of the list. Well, what are some other ways that people are doing? I have a client who gets so angry that he has to listen to a whole bunch of preamble at the top of a podcast. It's like,
Yeah.
well, dude, what do you think people are doing these podcasts for? They're monetizing them. They're talking about their sponsors up at the top. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's a handful of ways that you can make money from podcasting, and advertising and sponsorship is just one of them. And I would even advise people that are getting new and that are new in the podcasting game, don't focus on advertising and sponsorship. You're about to give yourself another job of trying to sell advertising and sponsorship to your show.
Right.
The two biggest ways to make money from your show are, number one, selling your services through your podcast to your community. The
Okay.
issue with that is that you need a community in order to sell products and services to.
Cart
So
horse.
yeah, cart horse, exactly. The easier way, from my perspective, a strategy that we didn't create, but we certainly did perfect and we built an entire system around, is actually called our guest to client strategy. So what we do is we invite clients that are on our show, bringing clients onto our show into the guest seat that would be closely aligned with the services that we offer.
Mm,
So, for example, in the podcasting space, I would want to look for somebody that either has a podcast that might need some help building their community or their influence, or
right.
somebody that's not in podcasting and helping them understand why podcasting is a perfect tool for them to build their business. I don't need any audience for that. I'm just building my business through the interview and building
Right.
the relationship through the interview too. That's the easiest way to do it. We created a 5-figure podcast launch. So we made close to $40,000 on our podcast before we even launched it, using that guest to client strategy.
Okay. So we've got the idea of promoting your services on the podcast. And not all speakers are going to go on to their podcast and just talk about
Right.
speaking blatantly.
Right.
However, in speeches and in everything we do in books, you can start your stories with
Right.
a client hired me to solve this problem. The bigger the name, the better at the top of that. And
Right.
then just go into talking about the problem. You can plant seeds very specifically about the kind of work that you do. I had this coaching client once. His name was Doug Sandler.
Right.
He went on to have the Nice Guys podcast and fame and fortune. That plants the seed that this is what I do. And I think that subliminal seed planting is a great idea too, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that it probably works much to your advantage if you do it that way, as opposed to getting on your own show and puking product, because nobody wants to hear a 30-minute infomercial about your business. If you just share your expertise, you build a relationship with your audience and build your community that way. Also, if you have guests on your show, you can easily build your influence by having other influencers on your show. You become guilty by association. I put myself in a position to be on Jane's show, and all of a sudden I'm somebody that might be elevated in the speaking business as my relationship with you evolves. So
Right.
there are several ways to soft sell those in your audience. If you're looking at it to get into the business to make a quick buck, don't do it that way. I mean, it could take you 6 months to 2 years before you start making any money from your show, depending on what your goal is when you get into the business, whether it's influence, community, or money. And you just kind of have to align yourself with which goal do you have for building your show, and just focus on that using either a coach or using a DIY program, or just using any strategy that you've seen, through the podcasting space.
Yeah, and there's two things that you said in that. Number one, the amount of time that it takes to get traction. And I've said before publicly, it took 7 years for my podcast to take off, but I was doing it in lots of different ways before. It wasn't really a quote unquote podcast. And I did not commit to doing it once a week until like year 4 or something
Wow.
like that.
Wow.
So once I committed,
Right.
it was teleclasses and all kinds of other things back in the day when we were just interviewing people. Once I committed, it really changed. What do you recommend the commitment should be going into this?
Yeah, well, when we started the Nice Guys on Business podcast in February or March of 2015, our biggest challenge was just finding the time, because we didn't realize what we had our hands potentially on. And most of the people that are listening to this, if they haven't started a podcast yet, they're like, well, I just don't know where I'm going to kind of crowbar this into my schedule. And
Right.
what we found was, when we started to go from 1 episode a week, which is where we started, then we went to 2 episodes a week, and right now we're at 5 episodes a week, because
Wow.
the way that I present it to my clients, and certainly I'm not telling anybody to get in and do 5 days a week if they
Sure.
have a million other things that they're doing in their life. But the way I present it is, if you can make $5,000 to $10,000 every time you open up that microphone, how many times do you want to open up that microphone every week? And so I let
Right.
you decide the answer to that. It's a lot of a commitment for me to get 5 days a week in, but I'll tell you, it's my only business development tool. So for me, how many sales calls do you make? Do you make 5
Mm.
sales calls a week? If you do, this is just a sales call for me.
So you're really committed at 5 a week. Let's talk about how you how you batch, because I know that people who are busy speakers on the road, they're going to say, okay, how am I going to make this work for myself? Even if they commit to doing it once a week.
Right.
Talk a little bit about how you can batch. I batch on Mondays. I'm doing 3 back to back today, but 3, I'm a little batch person, not a big
Right.
batch person.
Right. Yeah, there are some people that literally will do their entire month. If you're doing a weekly episode, so you're doing between 4 and 5 a month, there are people that will take one day a month and just dedicate it to doing the interviews.
Right.
And then if you're a professional at this, you know when it's time to give up the things that aren't in your zone of genius. So I would say bring in a production company, whether it's my production company or any production company or just a VA that can help you with the audio editing. As long as it sounds professional and you have a good beginning and an end, a good template for your show, oftentimes that's all you need to get the show out there and launched and sounding and feeling really good. So I would say whatever the amount of time that you have put into your episode, let's say that this is a half-hour long show, double or triple that time, that will be your commitment to your podcast. So if you do one episode a week of 30 minutes, that means you're going to spend about 2 hours a week building your podcast, 8 hours a month building your podcast.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about how we don't do editing over here.
Oh, you just put it in.
We just go. The dog barks. I mean, our brand is authenticity, right? So we just go with it. One time I was interviewing Kelly Swanson, and her dog didn't like it when she got on Zoom calls with people, and her dog came up and started biting on her butt while we were talking on the phone.
Well, the reality of it is
we just let it roll because that's kind of who we are over here.
So from a professional perspective, I would say to you, yeah, people want to see real, but people also want to be able to stay tuned into the show. So if you want to, you create a professional open, a professional close.
Yeah,
and
we
literally,
do that.
Yeah. So literally, I don't do any editing with inside the episode. There's no editing. Yeah, for my show, The Nice Guys, we're just like you. We're as authentic and real as possible.
Okay. And I offload all the rest of the work too. So I do a half-hour prep and then I do a half-hour recording. So I'm all in personally for an hour, but then the team takes it and starts to make it look beautiful. And you could be the team for people. We'll talk about an offer that we have from you at the end of the show, and we'll make sure we put show links in there. Let's talk about really specific how we talked about that subliminal kind of way of planting seeds for speaking. What are some more direct ideas on how to actually use podcasting to promote your speaking business?
Yeah. So if you take your episode and you basically run a 30-second to 60-second commercial, just pre-record a commercial for yourself, put a little jingle to it, make it sound professional. And and you can even put a little clip of your speaker reel, even if it's a 20-second piece of something in a cute or a entertaining story or something. You can promote that as a commercial on your own show. So while you don't want to turn it into an infomercial, you can be your own sponsor, especially in the beginning when you don't have anybody that's interested in sponsoring your show. Just throw it into the middle of your show or at the beginning of your show.
And you all will recognize, because this will be topped and tailed by our new little promo. I think it's under 30 seconds at both ends. And we're all in on the Wealthy Speakers School. Right. And so that's what we're talking about all the time is school. And I actually took a page out of Brooke Castillo's book because her podcast does a nice job at the end, just saying, hey, if you like what we were talking about, you got to come and check us out. And it's very, I can tolerate it. Like it's not in your face at all.
Well, as long as you're doing a soft sell and you're in and out of it quickly, the shows that have 5 or 6 or 7 minutes of commercials jacked into the beginning of the show, the people just forward through them. That becomes white noise for people.
Yeah.
The other thing that you can do, which is really fun to do also, is you can create a commercial, and you just have to keep track of your time within your show, but you can do a commercial, a live read commercial, where you're not specifically have a jingle and it's a hard beginning and an end. You can talk about your business. Hey, I'm just going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about something that I was able to do from stage just a couple of months ago, and just tell your story. Let it last 2 minutes, especially if you have a guest on your show. That's a great way to promote your business to that guest who potentially is in a position to hire you.
Right.
And so you're promoting to them, you're promoting to your community. And if you create a single call to action, which is key for any show, single call to action where you give your audience something to do by the end of the show or during the show. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
hey, stay tuned at the end of the show. We're gonna have a link that you can go to for Doug's program. And that's exactly what you need to do. Tease it a little bit and then get to it at the end.
That was an unconscious teaser. I just did it because I wanted to do it. I didn't think it through, but that was a good idea. And we should be doing more of those things to have people stay tuned. What do you think are some unexpected gifts that you get from podcasting? What has been your experience?
So again, we've been doing the show since February or March of 2015. And what I did not expect was the growth of my network from creating the show. Now, keep in mind, I've done 5 episodes a week for the last several years. We didn't start that way, but for the last several years, 5 episodes a week. I've done, as of December 2nd of 2019, we'll hit our 1,000th episode of our show.
Wow.
And so of those 1,000 episodes, I would say about 700 of them have been interview shows. So for me, that network of business owners and leaders, I use my podcast, although I use it as a marketing platform. I also use it as a coaching show, not coaching for me to be able to share with my audience or my guests, but I get coaching from those people. They come on, they tell me
Ooh.
about their tricks and tactics and tools. Imagine being a speaker, bringing somebody that's an influencer on, having them share some of the success stories, the behind the scenes stuff. You're getting free coaching where you would pay $500 to $5,000 for that hour of time with that person. And then you
Right.
can actually even continue the conversation after you stop recording. It's free coaching. Why wouldn't you
Yeah.
do it? Even if for that alone, it's free coaching. Get your
Yeah.
hero on your show.
I've
I've
never
had,
even thought about all of the ideas that I have gotten from my own podcast
oh
because
my
I'm a
gosh.
curious person.
Yeah, I mean, I have done some level of sales training in my past, and I've had Jeffrey Gittimer on my show. I've had
Mm.
Brian Tracy on my show. I've had John C. Maxwell in leadership. I've had Ariana Huffington, Gary Vaynerchuk. I've had 5 people that I can name that would never. I can't even buy an hour of their time, but they're giving me an hour of their time or 30 minutes of their time to not just coach me and my audience, but to share their message as well. And so free coaching, if you do it for nothing other than to have your heroes on your show, you're going to do a great job with coaching.
I love this idea, and I love it even more of asking all of your prospective clients to
Totally.
be on the show. So that one, I think right there is gold because, you might have said to yourself, hey, I'd like to get in to speak to Ariana Huffington's uh,
Right.
employees or whoever it might be, leadership group, and let me see if she'll come on the show. Like, I think that it really starts to create that relationship that in the end, it could be because they'll want to listen to the show first. Now you're becoming more of an expert in their mind. And by the end of it, you've built a great relationship with the person that you're interviewing. So interview all your prospects on your
Totally
show.
right. Lifetime value of one of my clients is probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So for me, it's a $50,000 to $100,000 prospecting opportunity, and they're giving me information. I'm coaching them; they're coaching me. Now, listen, you might be doing it with influencers. An influencer is not somebody you're going to sell. You're getting them on the show to help build your ego and your show's ego through associating with that influencer. But the
Right.
prospect way to go is great because you could put so many services that you provide into the hands of those guests. I mean, that was our key strategy and understanding. That was the aha moment for us when we not only figured out that strategy, but then we built a system around it, and that's a system that we're happy to share.
Beautiful. All right. Let's talk about people who are maybe a little bit more technology challenged. So I think that the way we do it here has got to be just so simple that anybody could indeed do it. But let's talk about technology here for a second.
So I'm sharing over this microphone in the spare bedroom in my house with some pictures up in the background. The hardest part of starting this podcast was hanging those pictures that are behind me.
And I like your
So
backdrop.
thanks. So I have a microphone. I use a Yeti Blue microphone, which is a $150 piece of equipment. This little arm that's right here, that was probably a $90 piece of equipment. I use very simple. I use Zoom, and if you know how to use video technology, and even if you don't, Zoom has some great tutorials, and we have great
Mm-hmm.
tutorials to show you how to use it. All in equipment wise, you're probably less than $400. And
Mm-hmm.
from a learning curve, as long as you're willing to learn something that you don't know how to do, if you get on the internet and I just don't want you to be left behind because your fear of equipment. Equipment is not, I mean, it's a big challenge for a lot of people that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s or whatever, even for some people in their 20s. But I would have to say that learn the equipment. It's really easy. And once you learn it, it's just like anything else. You'll get really good at it, but you're going to be bad in the beginning, and that's okay.
Right, right, right. And I do things in always like the most dumbed down way because it's me. I'm trying not to complicate my
Well,
life.
you know what your
I
strengths are. So,
I have my Yeti mic here, but I don't use it. I have a comfort zone with my headset because I can move around as much
and
as
I
I
just take
want.
that. I
And
just take this
you
with
take
me
it with
wherever I
you.
go.
You're in the
Right.
habit of taking it
Right.
with you. And I probably should have the boom and set it up that way. But I've never really noticed a huge quality difference between, I don't know, maybe like $100 headset and the Yeti mic. I'm sure you have some real specific ideas on what people should have in terms of equipment. But then we turn on Zoom, I hit record, and we go.
Right.
Then when I end the meeting, it's recorded out to the cloud and I have somebody else grab it and then they do something with it. And it could not be really any simpler, I
Yeah,
don't think.
you want to make sure that if your zone of genius is not technology, so if you're outside of that world and technology is not your thing, I wouldn't attempt to. Why are you going to attempt to edit your own podcast? Don't do it. Just bring in somebody for relatively inexpensive, based upon what you can potentially make from
Yeah.
your show from a monetization perspective. It doesn't make any sense for you to edit your own podcast. Stay within
Yeah.
your zone of genius. That's what I would
Okay.
advise.
Well, that actually segues us nicely into a turnkey idea that you have that you're offering. It's called the Turnkey Podcast Company, and you have talked to us about if somebody were to approach you right from the get-go, what would be the process?
So what I want to try to do in a strategy call with them. So number one thing is a strategy consultation. It's called our discovery call. We just determine some goals for podcasting for you. Are you doing it to build community, influence, or make money? And any of those answers is fine, but I want to have a strategy session with them for, 20, 30 minutes. And that's not,
Okay.
there's no cost to that call. What we then want to do is we want to determine what's the best way for you to proceed. Are you a DIY person where you want to take on the responsibility yourself? Do you
You'll
want us
help
to
them piece it all together.
help the piece it together? And we have a course, and the templates and all of that is included in that, including consultation call and group coaching as we go through it. So that's part of our DIY program. The next step up from that is just doing something like an admin launch where we're doing it for them or along with them, let's say, along with
Right.
them. I guess that's probably a better way to say it because we need you involved. We go along with you and we create the relationship between you and Apple Podcasts. We create the hosting relationship for you. We help you build your template for your show, and you're off and running with the launch. We help build the equipment as well. And then the final one is our higher end, our premium program, where somebody really doesn't want to get involved in any of the aspects of it other than just giving us information based upon the answers to the questions. We build a show around the answers and their goals, and that is our launch program, our concept of launch program. So you range
Beautiful.
anywhere from $1,500 to $10,000 for the programs, and we're doing a special for the wealthy speaker listeners. We're doing a $297 DIY program that includes the consult and the launch and everything involved in the DIY.
Beautiful. Let's talk about the link where they can find that, please.
So it's just turnkeypodcast.com/wealthy speaker. It couldn't be any easier than that one.
It doesn't get any easier than that. And Monica's going to put that in the show notes for us. And let's talk about show notes here before we go, Doug. How important do you think those are as kind of backup to what it is that you're doing on the podcast?
Well, if you go back to the goals for the show for a second, it just depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to turn use the guest to client strategy, then the SEO that you're going to get is not necessarily important, because you're going to get a lot of SEO from putting, whether it's a transcription or an edited Q&A or a long or a short format blog post out of your show notes. You're going to get some SEO juice out of that. If your strategy is to build influence and community, that would be important. If, however, your strategy is using the guest to client strategy, it doesn't even matter whether you have even a website, because it has nothing to do with your community or your audience.
Okay, very good.
I would say yes, it's important to have show notes to a certain degree because some people are going to want to find out more information, especially if you're building your show. We didn't talk about this at all, but if you're building your business based upon affiliate relationships that you have, people clicking on a link, buying a product, you getting a percentage of it, you need
Right.
to have show notes. So important links would be key. So some
Okay.
level of show notes would be good. The length of the show notes would be determined by what your goals are for your show.
And it's going to be, right. Everybody's going to want something different probably from that.
Exactly.
Doug, it's always so great to have you on the show. You really, truly are the nice guy. And I love you kind of showing up with all of your beautiful information, but also just a kind intention.
Thanks.
Thank you for being on the show yet again with us. We will definitely, I'm sure, have people circling back to number 1 and number 2 podcasts from our interviews.
Just to give you the kudos, Jane, for sure. Every time I come on your show, it is by far the biggest outreach of community. So I know that your community is connected. I know that they really enjoy the information that you provide. So when I had an opportunity to have you on my show, I was thinking, I'd love to be on your show too, because I think what ends up happening is that it's a great guest exchange and people really, they reach out from your show. So your community is engaged. And I respect that because that is a challenge for most podcasters to engage their audience. And you do a great job with that.
Well, thank you so much. And we would love to know that you're engaged. Shout us out on iTunes. That's we've been going all in on iTunes. Give us a rating, give us a review on iTunes. Make sure you subscribe so that you will get all of the latest episodes. Well, thanks again, Doug, for being on the show. And with that, we will say, see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed our show, you'll want to come and visit us at the Wealthy Speaker School, where we provide a proven roadmap for building your dream business. Go to wealthyspeakerschool.com. And for show notes for today's podcast, head on over to speakerlauncher.com and click on podcast. I'll see you soon, Wealthy Speakers.